Experts, photographs, x-rays, and clothing of President John Kennedy, and they agree with the Warren Commission that he was killed by 2 bullets fired from behind. The conclusion of the panel's secret study last year were made public by the Justice Department, which had requested the review of this closely guarded material. The experts all are medical professors, and Dan Rather talked with one of them, Dr. Russell Fisher.
The other bullet struck the president at the right side of the base of the neck.
Excuse me, this would be
which would be in this area. It emerged in the front from the midline at the level of the thigh. The possibility that this may have followed any other pathway than the one we just indicated was considered, but there was no evidence found to indicate that this was true. There was clearly a track between the wound in the back of the body and the wound in the front of the neck. Any other pathway connecting those wounds and the direct back-to-front pathway that we believe was present would certainly have, or almost certainly have struck bone. There was no evidence in the x-rays that he had bone injury within the neck.
Doctor, I'm sure you know the theory that's been put forth since the Warren Commission report, that this wound that showed in the throat and near the base of the back of the neck could have been inflicted from the front. That is, there was a tracheotomy performed at the time there was an attempt to save the president's life, and the tracheotomy so confused that wound that no one can say with certainty from what direction that wound was inflicted.
The findings at our examination clearly show that there was an entrance wound in the back of the body. This was characteristic of an entrance wound, and since this wound was connected by a track to the wound in the front, there can be no other conclusion than that the bullet exited in the front. The x-rays showed there was no bullet still in this part of the body.
You found no evidence of anything more than 2 bullet wounds.
That's correct.
New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, among others, believes that Lee Harvey Oswald had accomplices in the assassination. Garrison sought the autopsy material to prove his conspiracy theory in a trial which had been scheduled to start next week. But a Washington judge refused to subpoena the material, saying Garrison first must prove his need for it. In New Orleans, station WWL-TV filmed Assistant District Attorney James Alcock's reaction to the development.
The release by Attorney General Ramsey Clark of an opinion by a panel of so-called experts which purports to back the findings of the Warren report on the eve of the trial of Clay Shaw makes it absolutely necessary for us to obtain the photographs and x-rays of the autopsy, as well as the clothing worn by President Kennedy on the day that he was assassinated. Prior to the release of this opinion, it was our intention to proceed to trial with or without this material. However, since Ramsey Clark has released only a small portion of the evidence, and only that which favors the defense and the Warren report, it is absolutely necessary that we obtain that evidence upon which the panel based their opinion of the autopsy before proceeding to trial. This was another effort by the federal government to aid the defense and to stop the prosecution by the state of Louisiana of Clay Shaw. Therefore, I am today filing a motion requesting a continuance of this case to be reset only after receipt by this office of all of the evidence called for in our subpoenas of the evidence used in the autopsy report and all other evidence secretly held by the federal government. In the event the federal government does not honor our subpoenas and blocks our attempt to present all of the evidence, this case cannot be brought to trial.
In the Sirhan murder trial in Los Angeles, the judge today excused a foe of capital punishment who had been seated tentatively on the jury. On this final weekend of the Johnson administration, the nation's 36th president and the nation's capital are saying farewell to each other. And notably missing is the abuse Mr. Johnson had to bear during the last year of his tenure. From both sides of the aisle, senator after senator arose today to pay him tribute. Among them, Senator Edward Kennedy, who noted that the circumstances which put Johnson in the White House inevitably created speculation about strained relations between their families. But in the senator's words, the differences that developed later on came not from personal grievances, but from the obligation of men in public life to discharge their responsibilities as they saw them. And Kennedy added, "I know that President Johnson understood this, and history will as well." The president himself went to the National Press Club to say goodbye.
If I could have one thing presented to me today that I'd rather have than anything else in the world, it would be that I could bring back from Vietnam all the men I sent out there, and that we could have peace in the world so that those men could come and enjoy being with their families again and enjoy the benefits of our affluence and this great society that we have. So the thing I would like to do most is to find some way, somehow, soon, to bring peace to the world. It has eluded me. I hope that the members of my party will try to treat President Nixon as I tried to treat President Eisenhower. If they do, I believe that they'll find that it'll be the best investment they ever made, not only for their country, but for themselves. President Eisenhower returned that investment to me in my 5 years of presidency with interest and wise counsel and great help. And we are not wise enough to solve these problems if just half of us are aboard. The president's got to have the country's support. I've had a wonderful 5 years. I don't hold a thing in the world against anyone in this town that I know or anywhere else. And I'm leaving this town with nothing but gratitude and love in my heart. I don't know, there's not a Republican in the House or Senate mean enough for me to dislike or hate. Or a Democrat either.
Henry Cabot Lodge, in line to be the new chief U.S. negotiator in Paris, was reported today to feel the first U.S. troop withdrawals from Vietnam might be possible this year if a ceasefire can be worked out and if progress is made at the Paris talks. FBI agents have joined police in the search for 2 men who held up a bank in Poughkeepsie, New York yesterday, and they should have no trouble identifying them as a result of these scenes recorded by the bank camera, described by CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney.
If a Hollywood director had been there, he could not have placed the bandits much more in center stage or in better focus for the hidden camera. As one robber pointed a rifle and lined customers and tellers up against a wall, his accomplice scooped up $76,000 in cash, and using a frightened teller as hostage, he moved to the door and to a getaway car. The hostage was freed immediately, unharmed, and no shots had been fired. The alarm was sounded promptly. The branch manager was on the phone when the robbers first entered, and one witness was able to remember the getaway car's license number. Bank authorities say they're relieved that there was no violence, and equally they're pleased that the pictures give police the kind of clues they like to have but usually don't get. These are the bank robbers. This is the bandit who pointed the gun. And his accomplice, the thief who scooped up the cash.
The National Communicable Disease Center said today that the Hong Kong flu is on the wane in the United States, but it probably will be around for a good number of years yet. The center said that reports from 122 cities showed that in the 6 weeks the disease was at its peak, 6,805 persons died from flu and pneumonia. In that farewell address to the National Press Club, President Johnson displayed a joking as well as a serious mood. And here are some of his light remarks.
I have never, I must say, doubted your energy or your courage or, for that matter, your patriotism. That's why I asked General Hershey to get in touch immediately with each of you. Someone told me the other day that the press had had a few complaints about the treatment that you'd received during this administration. Well, this is a fine time to be telling me now. Why didn't you mention it sooner? Well, I've got some complaints of my own. Maybe I should have mentioned them sooner to you. Getting misquoted, for instance, is one thing I've got to complain about. I remember that Peter Hurd painting. You all remember that? I never said it was ugly. Actually, I thought it was a pretty good likeness. Except for one little detail. It left off the halo.
This is Eric Severide in Washington. This capital is still Johnson City, D.C., and will remain so until Monday at high noon. The President is going through in these last hours the bittersweet experience of private and public farewells. A great many people, including senators, are giving him the praise and the credits he no doubt feels are a bit belated. No presidency in a generation has been so bitterly controverted. Whatever the final balance of his failures and great deeds, his mistakes were those of commission, not omission. He not only filled the office, he overpowered it. His worst enemies know that for 5 years there was a man in town. One of his very last appearances was today at the headquarters of the other Washington industry, the press. At times he has been furious with the press, like all presidents before him, but not bitter. And he contented himself with saying that the problem of communicating with and through the press was troublesome, and maybe he suggested that journalists ought to think about this a bit. They often do, individually, but not collectively. An administration may be a monolith, but journalism is diversity itself. The truth is that government and press must continue in a marriage of necessity. Neither can live without the other. It is always in greater or lesser degree an adversary relationship. If the press has no obligation to criticize for the sake of criticism, it also has no obligation to perform as cheerleader. What ultimately angers presidents is a tendency of the press to look automatically for frictions, differences, mistakes. Various organs and individuals undoubtedly overdo this. But in democracy's long run, that is probably healthier than a general tendency to suppress and sugarcoat. To some degree, the press creates the national attitude toward an administration. To a greater degree, it reflects it. No matter a president's personal relations with the press. Mr. Eisenhower was wary of journalists and rarely saw them privately, but he generally enjoyed what is called a good press. Mr. Johnson saw them privately more than any president ever, and this changed next to nothing in their portrayal of his administration. A frequent complaint of public officials is that editors will not accept criticism of themselves. They will dish it out but won't take it. And yesterday, Mrs. Johnson's press aide observed that the press seemed incapable of self-criticism. There is truth in this. There is also truth in the proposition that politicians and public officials are not famous for admitting their own costly mistakes. And it would be hard to call to mind one of them who protested when he was overpraised, another frequent sin of the imperfect press. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Friday, January 17th, 1969. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.